We're going now to begin our discussion on the events leading to the Civil War. Now, this is going to take a little bit of introduction, and then we will get into the Jacksonian era. Thomas Jefferson had long imagined an empire of liberty that would span North America and perhaps even extend into South America. However, he did not enter office with any clear plans for expansion. With Spain, which was becoming increasingly a very weak European power, in control of the Louisiana Territory, Jefferson reasoned that it was only a matter of time until the United States would have an opportunity to expand westward. That stated, once the Louisiana Territory changed hands, the situation changed. Jefferson did not trust France, or specifically, Jefferson did not trust Napoleon Bonaparte to stay out of North American affairs. He feared the nation would find itself wedged between Britain in Canada and France in Louisiana. When the Spanish closed the port of New Orleans to American crops, Jefferson was forced to act in defense of American interests. He sought only to end the long-standing disputes over New Orleans and counterbalance the French advances in North America by buying parts of Florida. But Napoleon presented the U.S. with a different option, which, while Jefferson had not seriously considered it, it did fascinate him. In the end, it proved a wise decision to purchase all of the Louisiana Territory in 1803, and the nation doubled its geographical size, which also allowed access to the resources of the wilderness and important waterways for travel and for commerce. Additionally, the Louisiana Territory served as sort of a buffer zone, keeping foreign powers in North America at a greater distance from the primary population of the United States. Although the War of 1812 essentially ended for the most part in stalemate, Americans came away from the conflict with a newfound sense of national spirit. Nationalism is on the rise. They began to see themselves as Americans first, and New Yorkers and Virginians second, right? Or whatever state it is, that sort of comes second, where Americans first. Although state pride doesn't disappear, completely entirely. This American spirit boosted the popularity of the federal government, and the newfound national spirit after the War of 1812 also spilled over into politics. James Monroe easily defeated his opponent in the election of 1816, and one newspaper dubbed these tranquil years as the era of good feelings, and the name stuck. Now, here we are getting into the Jacksonian era. The era of good feelings came to an end with the presidential election of 1824. Although Republicans dominated national politics, the party was breaking apart internally. Monroe's cabinet included no fewer than 3 men who all wanted to be president, each representing a sectional interest. John C. Calhoun, the very unpleasant man in the picture, the unpleasant-looking man in the picture, and Secretary of the Treasury William Crawford both fought for the role of spokesperson for the South, while Secretary of State John Quincy Adams promoted the interests of New England. Outside the cabinet, Speaker of the House Henry Clay stood for the American system, and the military hero Andrew Jackson championed Western ideas, and he's kind of the only political outsider who's there. Party leaders wound up backing Crawford, although a paralyzing stroke did remove him from an active role in the campaign. He still received almost as many votes as Clay. Calhoun removed himself from the race, settling for another term as vice president and making plans for another run at the presidency in 1828 or 1832. Jackson received 43% of the popular vote compared to Adams' 31%, and he won 99 electoral votes to Adams' 84. But because Jackson did not receive a majority in the Electoral College, the election was decided by the House of Representatives, where Speaker Clay exercised considerable political influence. With no chance of winning, Henry Clay threw his support to John Quincy Adams, who shared his nationalist views. 13 of the 21 states voted for Adams, and he became president. When Adams appointed Clay as his Secretary of State, Jackson's supporters were very angry, and they charged that a corrupt bargain had been made between the two men. Although there is no firm evidence to support this accusation, it became an issue that followed Adams during his presidency and was raised by Jackson himself during the next presidential campaign. Few candidates were as qualified as John Quincy Adams to be president. Fewer presidents have had such a disappointing term as president. In his first annual message to Congress in 1825, he laid out an extensive program of federal spending that stretched even the most liberal definition of internal improvements. Among other things, Adams called for the creation of a national university and a national observatory. But the president faced determined opposition everywhere he turned, both from Jackson's supporters and Calhoun, who filled Senate committees with men who did not support the president. When Adams asked Congress for funds to send a delegate to the Congress of Panama, a meeting of newly independent nations in Latin America, Southerners argued so fiercely against the idea that the conference had ended by the time money was actually appropriated. Adams did not help his own cause. He refused to engage in partisan politics. He did not remove opponents from appointed offices when he became president, and ultimately he alienated his own supporters. His was a rather idealistic position, which ultimately served to earn him very little support for a second term. Politics had an impact on one of the most important domestic issues, protective tariffs. The tariff of 1824 imposed duties on woolen goods, cotton, iron, and other finished products to protect textile mills in New England and industries in the mid-Atlantic states. 4 years later, Congress raised tariffs to the highest level before the Civil War and increased taxes on imports of raw wool. The Jacksonians included the duties on raw material in the legislation to weaken Adams' support from the mid-Atlantic and northern states. Indeed, Jacksonians believed the bill was so terrible and so onerous to different interest groups in different parts of the country, they felt it had no chance of passing. But the Tariff of 1828 did become law, and soon it was referred to as the Tariff of Abominations. So if you see that in your textbook, please highlight it. Make a flashcard. The election of 1828. The factionalism within the Republican ranks led to a split and the creation of two political parties. Jackson's Democratic Republicans, which would eventually be shortened to simply Democrats, and Adams' National Republicans. Martin Van Buren of New York, who preferred rivalries between parties to disputes within one party, masterminded the emergence of the Democrats. The campaign itself was less about issues than about the character of the two candidates. It was, for the most part, two smear campaigns, right? Jacksonians denounced Adams for being an aristocrat and for allegedly trying to influence Russian policy by providing the Tsar Alexander I with an American prostitute during Adams' term as an ambassador. Adams' supporters then vilified Jackson as a murderer. Jackson was famous for fighting duels. They also claimed he was an adulterer because he and his wife had mistakenly gotten married before her divorce from her first husband. And they also referred to him as an illiterate backwoodsman. These attacks by the National Republicans did little to detract from Jackson's popularity with the people. Ordinary Americans admired Jackson's leadership qualities and decisiveness. They preferred to remember Jackson as the Indian fighter and the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, and they forgot about the important role Adams played in negotiating the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812. Jackson also had clear political advantages. As a Westerner, he had secure support from that part of the country, while the fact that he was a slave owner also gave him strength in the South. Conversely, Adams was strong only in New England. Jackson was swept into office with 56% of the popular vote from a greatly expanded electorate. This is where we will end for now. The next lecture will pick up with Indian removal.